What's up, gamers? Hoops here. Welcome to the video. Thanks so much for stopping by the channel. I really appreciate you for that. In my last video, I shared some of my early first impressions of the Battlefield 6 open beta. Now, all of that came from my first 10 to 12 hours with the game during the early access portion of the first weekend that the beta was available. So that first Thursday and Friday. And I think that, well, I never felt like the beta was bad. I definitely felt like it was a little bit messy and there were some technical issues that kind of stood out to me that made it feel like there was a lack of polish. And so even though I called the game mid in my thumbnail, I did still have a lot of fun with it, and I would say that over the 40 hours that I spent with the beta between the 2 weekends, I had an absolute blast. I even got to play with some of my friends for a couple of hours, which was really kind of nice. And so overall, I enjoyed my time with the beta, but I am a little bit critical of some things because I know what Battlefield can be, and I just want it to live up to those standards, if that makes sense. But going into weekend 2 of the open beta, there were a couple of things that I wanted to keep my eye on. And I'm going to go ahead and say, I want to give credit where credit's due. I was impressed by the fact that they were able to make some minor changes to, like, these are very small details, but for me, details matter. You know, if you're going to put out a game that's going to be a premium priced $70 purchase, then I think that everything should be well polished, it should work properly, and there shouldn't be any of these sort of, you know, glitches or bugs or whatever it may be. And so seeing that there were actually some minor updates and some minor changes to things between weekend 1 and weekend 2 of the beta is actually quite reassuring, in my opinion. It shows that the dev team's going to have a level of responsiveness, that they care about the game. I mean, I think it would have been totally acceptable for them to leave the beta in the same state that it was in between weekend 1 and weekend 2, but the fact that they actually made some meaningful adjustments to things, and again, this is in the small details department, I think that that's, you know, for me at least, it goes a long way. I'm still cautiously optimistic. I'll share some of my current skepticism with you a little bit later in the video. But the first thing that I wanted to touch on was one of the biggest issues that I came across in the first weekend of the beta, and that had to do with the deployable shield for the support class. Now, I think that this is an awesome gadget. It's effective, but it's also very simple. And so I was excited to see that they were kind of moving in this direction when it comes to some of the tools that we have at our disposal in Battlefield, because I like the idea of being able to kind of shape and alter the landscape to suit your needs in a game like this. But what I was encountering when using the deployable shield in the first weekend was that 1 out of every 3 times that I would use this deployable shield, it just wouldn't place itself properly. So even though the game is telling me that I can put the shield here, and I would go through the animation of putting the shield down, the shield just wouldn't appear. And I think I had about 8 examples of this in the last video. I've got another 7 or so here, and these are all from weekend 1. So it's just fairly inconsistent. I would say that if I use the shield 100 times, 30 or 40 of those times, the shield just did not work properly. And so that was a little bit of a bummer. It became quite frustrating. The only upside was that at least with the support class, you can drop down your supply bag and you can get the shield back on a brief cooldown. But aside from that, it really didn't have, you know, it wasn't impressing me. But going into weekend 2, in that last clip you could see there, I was able to put my shield down while rubble was falling on top of me. And overall, this just felt way more consistent, far more reliable going into weekend 2. And I was actually quite impressed to see that, because it's, again, it's something that I think that they could have left, you know, in the state that it was in and focused on polishing the full release of the game. But to know that they actually went into the beta and made these subtle updates, it still wasn't perfect. I still had about 4 or 5 instances where the shield wouldn't go down when I tried to use it. But 4 to 5 out of maybe 50 uses of the shield is a lot better than 30 or 40 out of 100. And so I was definitely impressed. Like I said, I wanted to just kind of give them some credit in that department. And this is, a good sign of things to come, in my opinion, that at least they're going to be paying attention. They're going to be able to fly in these sort of minor updates to the game to kind of get things working in the way that they should be and iron out some of these minor technical issues. And I really like this gadget. It changes the landscape a little bit, but you can use it for all sorts of things when it comes to defending, to pushing an attack, and just kind of providing cover for your team. So I think that that's going in the right direction. Now, the next thing that I did notice was, even though the deployable shield was a lot more reliable, when I started playing the recon class, I noticed that the deployable respawn beacon was giving me the same sort of trouble. So it does seem like there are still some things for them to kind of get working properly. I think this happened maybe 6 or 7 times in the time that I spent playing the recon class. But again, I don't have the luxury of being able to put down a support supply bag when I'm playing the recon class. So when I'm robbed of this gadget, I'm kind of robbed of it for a good while. So that doesn't feel great. But one of the areas that I did notice a minor change was when it came to the idle animations. So in the first weekend, I saw a lot of gun grips clipping through the soldiers' hands. And it looks like they actually made some changes to the idle animations here so that you're either holding the gun before the grip or after the grip. You can see the guy in the front right still has the grip going through his hand. But again, it's a minor detail, but these details add up. And so when there's a lot of small things that are wrong about the game, it kind of makes you feel like a little bit of those flashbacks to Battlefield 2042. I mean, I remember playing that beta and it was an absolute mess. And I knew just off of my time spent with the beta that the game wasn't going to be able to launch in a functional state, at least to my standards. And so I'm hopeful that Battlefield 6 won't have that same issue, and that come launch it'll be in a pretty good place, and that people will be happy to be jumping into the battlefield. There is still this bug where when you empty your magazine, you'll start the automatic reload, and then you throw a grenade, and your gun will continue to reload without needing to do the full animation. So it's kind of like this magic reload that you can get if you have a grenade available. So that is a bug, and I'm hopeful that they'll be able to fix that and have that patched out before the game launches. But I do still think that the spawns for these small team games like Domination, King of the Hill, Squad Deathmatch even, the spawns need to be looked at so that they are a little bit more consistent and that they don't give you those moments of feeling like you've been kind of cheated by the enemy spawns. I hear that they're going to be making some changes to the movement in the game, so mostly around the running slide and the jumping, and I think that that's really great. For me, the slide is good to get to cover, but it does feel a little bit more action hero than it does tactical warfare. So I'm interested to see how these changes are going to kind of keep the grounded realism that Battlefield is going for. But overall, when it came to the gunplay, this was absolutely top-notch in my opinion. I felt like the guns, they performed great. And one of the things that I was really impressed by throughout the entirety of the beta was how reliable and consistent hip firing was for my weapons. Not only did it feel good to hip fire, but I also found myself building my weapons to kind of support the hip fire playstyle. Like I was picking attachments that were going to increase my hip fire accuracy, which is something that I don't think I've ever done in a first-person shooter before. I typically go for things that are going to help with like my aimed precision, and so it was really nice to be able to feel comfortable and confident when I was using my gun from the hip. I feel like it makes a lot of sense for if the enemy's within 10, 15, even 20 meters, that you should just be able to kind of point your gun in their direction and still hit them. I feel like it's a little bit unrealistic when we have this wild spray pattern happening from our weapons just because we fire it from the hip, as if it's not going to still be accurate. Now, one thing I would like to see implemented into Battlefield 6, this is a clip from Battlefield 1. I'm not necessarily expecting this sort of level of depth and detail to the controller sensitivity scheme, but when you're playing on console and you only have one sensitivity that is paired to both your look sensitivity and your aim sensitivity, it can feel a little bit bad sometimes, because I would like to be able to turn my character a little bit faster and then have a little bit tighter of sensitivity when I am aiming my gun down sights. So if they could implement something like that, pretty simple, where it just kind of decouples the two, so that when I'm aiming my gun, I can have one sensitivity, and when I'm looking as my soldier, I have another. I think that that would go a long way for console players, personally. Now, I did say I wanted to share a little bit of my skepticism when it comes to Battlefield 6 in this video, and this comes from a little bit of looking back at how the last few games have been delivered to the players. So when we look at games like Battlefield 4, Battlefield Hardline even, and Battlefield 1, the game would launch, you would pay full price to play the game, and then throughout the game's lifespan we would get these DLC packs. And each of these DLC packs was typically about 10 to 15 US dollars. And with that, we would typically get, 4 or 5 maps. And along with that, you would get new weapons, new gadgets, new specializations, different things like that. So just as an example, Battlefield 4, the game launched with 10 maps. And then through the DLC content packs, they added another 23 maps to the game. And with Battlefield 1, the game launched with 9 maps, and they added 22 DLC maps to the game. Now, again, this is DLC that you're paying for, so I do understand that in a lot of ways that can kind of fracture the player base, because the people that don't purchase those DLC packs, now they kind of get grouped into another matchmaking pool, where if they get loaded into a game with a map that they don't have, that they don't own, then they get booted back to the lobby, and that can kind of be a frustrating experience for the player, and it might even be something that turns them away from continuing to play the game, because they feel like they've been kind of priced out of being able to have fun. With Battlefield 5 and with Battlefield 2042, they kind of transitioned to this more of a live service model, where they started delivering these content packs to the players for free. And I think that that's really great from our end as the consumer. It's really great to be getting free content. But there's also this kind of double-edged sword there, where EA, as the publisher, they're not necessarily profiting off of this additional content that is being produced and being released to the player base. So they're less incentivized to continue to, provide this content over a long period of time. When I look at Battlefield 5, the game launched with 8 maps, and we got 12 maps for free through these content drops. And you could say that's, on one end, that's really great. We got 12 maps for free. There's a total of 20 maps in that game. If you're somebody who likes Battlefield 5, you got free content throughout I think it was about a year and 3 months that they basically were delivering new weapons, new gadgets, and new maps to the player base completely for free. But we can also look and see that that's 10 fewer maps from games like Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 4. And we also, I can't really speak to the quality of these maps, but that's another thing entirely, is like, just because we're getting a new free map doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to be a good new free map, if that makes sense. But we can also kind of look at the way that these content drops were delivered to the player base. So with Battlefield 5, the game launched in November of 2018, and players were given a new map in December of the same year, that's pretty great. In March of 2019, we got 2 new maps. We got 1 in June and 1 in July. We got 2 in September and 3 in October. We got 1 in December of 2019 and then 1 in February of 2020. And then it was in February of 2020, or shortly after, that they announced that they were going to be no longer supporting Battlefield 5 with this live service content offering. So that's about a year and 3 months that the game was being provided content before they decided, hey, we're no longer going to be doing these content drops for the players. When we look at Battlefield 2042, which I'm sure nobody really wants to, the game launched with 7 maps, and there were 9 DLC maps released, and from what I'm reading here, it says that 6 of them were classic maps. So just maps that they kind of remade and put into Battlefield 2042. So that is kind of a little bit, that's where some of my skepticism comes from, is that even though with Battlefield 6, we are going to be getting free content drops, so we don't necessarily have to pay for the additional maps and weapons and gadgets that they're going to be releasing to us. We also, at this time, don't necessarily have a content roadmap to base things off of. So I don't necessarily know if the game's going to be supported for a year and a half. Is it going to be supported for 2 years? How many new maps are we going to get added to the game? How many new weapons and gadgets are they going to add to the game? And different things like that. So I do have a little bit of skepticism in that regard, and I think that that's pretty warranted. I'm somebody who I know that I'm not going to be a day one purchaser of Battlefield 6. I'll probably wait for a sale. Maybe I'll see if I can get a discount around the holidays, or maybe Santa will decide that I've been good this year and he'll drop it off for me. But those are just a few of the things that I've been currently considering when it comes to whether or not I'm going to purchase Battlefield 6 that I figured I would share while I was here. I've been some of these clips I'm just kind of giggling at as I'm recording my audio, because I'm remembering like how frustrating it felt to have teammates who just have a complete lack of patience when it comes to letting the teammates revive them. Some of these, they're just like, as soon as they die, they're holding down whatever button it is for them to just immediately respawn. And it's almost laughable, because I feel like if you just had a little bit of patience for me, I could get you up and we can continue fighting together. But that's one of those things that I think is going to be a little bit unique to the beta, is that there's going to be a lot of people playing who maybe haven't played a Battlefield before, don't necessarily understand how Battlefield is different from other first-person shooters out there, and they're just kind of in that mindset of like, go, go, go. When I get downed, I'm going to instantly respawn so I can just continue running out there and continue getting into the action. But for me personally, I found that when I was able to kind of slow down my pace a little bit, take my time, really think through some of my decisions, I had a lot more fun with the game. I found myself dying a lot less weekend 2 than I did weekend 1. I didn't feel like I was constantly running into a meat grinder, which I felt was really important. So I think it will be interesting to see the overall reception to this game, because it does seem like it's going to reach a larger and broader audience than the last 2 Battlefield titles have, at least. So while I'm hopeful that we're getting a return to form here with Battlefield 6, I do think that there are still some minor things that I'm a little bit concerned about. For example, I think that the auto spotting system could use a little bit of fine-tuning. I think that in some of the previous games, they've had it kind of balanced around having to have an enemy in your sights for like maybe 2 seconds before it'll give you that indicator over their head of saying, here's where the enemy is located. And I think if that faded away a little bit faster as well, that might lead to a little bit more rewarding gameplay. And I am a little bit nervous about the overall balancing of some of these classes, especially when it comes to the gadgets that they have available. So if you haven't been following along with some of the updates that they've released, talking about some of the changes that they plan on making for Battlefield 6 before launch. So they've announced that they plan on giving the deployable respawn beacon to the assault class to kind of be used as a gadget that can kind of give you a foothold when you're trying to push the front lines of an objective. And while I do think that that's an interesting design decision, I think that it's going to lead to there being a lot of competition when it comes to what gadgets do you pick and which gadgets are in some ways too strong to not pick, if that makes sense. So when you look at the assault class, just from the beta, they had the ability to take a second primary weapon as one of their gadgets. You've also got the grenade launchers as an option. Now we're going to have a deployable respawn beacon. I also hear that there's going to be some sort of a ladder that will help you get to high ground. And so when you have these gadgets that are fighting for that gadget slot. It's right. You can take 2 things with you, and you're going to probably default to the strongest pick a lot of the time. And I think that with having a secondary primary on the table as one of your gadgets, it's almost too strong to not choose that. Like, it just offers way too much value and way too much versatility to ignore that as one of your gadget options, which then limits the amount of variety that we're going to see when it comes to people playing that class role, if that makes sense. And so, like, another example could be with the support class. Now that support is also providing ammunition and they have access to the defibrillator, it's like, is the defibrillator going to be too powerful of a tool to ignore, or is it always going to be one of those things that a lot of the support players default to because of the amount of value that it provides for you? I mean, getting a teammate up almost instantly, you now have 2 guns on your side of the fight. So that's something that I think it'll be interesting to see how they kind of balance these gadgets so that people are picking, a nice variety of things rather than having gadgets that just kind of get completely ignored. And then the last thing that definitely stuck out to me is that while I had a lot of fun with the Battlefield 6 beta, there were a few moments where I was like, yeah, this is Battlefield. But I don't think I had any of those moments where I was like, holy shit, this is Battlefield, if you know what I mean. And so I will be very interested in seeing how some of these maps allow us to really kind of alter the terrain and have those big epic moments where a dam is breaking or a skyscraper is falling, and really kind of return that feeling of what Battlefield has always kind of been for me personally. But I feel like I've been rambling for quite a bit here. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I really appreciate you for stopping by the video. I have been and always will be Coobs. Peace and love, gamers.